Okay, so we found a vacant house that is not owned by a bank. So we go to the tax assessor's website or we call them on the phone and we look up the owner. And I don't care where you live, even if you live in a non-disclosure state, which we'll talk about, ownership is a matter of public record. And the tax assessor's records will indicate it's owned by John and Linda Smith or owned by Aquin Financial or whatever. So the point is we've got to locate the owner's information before we can move forward. All right, I use Sitex to do this too. It's very useful because it's kind of like having the tax assessor on my computer. Having that data available to me where in the market I can't go to the tax assessor's website and really look up much of anything valuable. You can do a Google search to find the owner. By the way, when the owner is an individual, there's a couple caveats here, and this is really timely because a lot of feedback, a lot of Q&A in the question bank and the inner circle about this. How many of you have found a house where the tax rolls indicate the house is owned by an individual, but you later find out that it's actually owned by the bank, and the new deed to the bank hasn't been recorded? Who's seen that? That can happen, and sometimes it's a result of the bank being overwhelmed and they just don't record. I also think there's a strategy in that as far as transfer taxes, closing costs, and things like that. And in some cases, it's the municipality that's backed up and they just haven't had a chance to record the deed. So the tax rolls indicate it's owned by an owner. You contact that owner, just say, and they say, no, we lost the house to the bank. How do you find out who the bank is? How do you find out who the real owner is even though the deed hasn't been recorded? Ask the foreclosure trustee. All right, in most cases that is a court process, and so you can ask for the trustee down at your county annex, and they'll have that information for you because their records will indicate the data pertaining to the transfer, even though the deed hasn't been recorded. Now, wait a minute. If the deed hasn't been recorded, does the bank really even own the property? Yeah, they do. A deed doesn't have to be recorded in order for ownership to be legitimate and binding. However, without it being recorded, you do leave yourself open to issues. A lien gets filed against the seller, and now all of a sudden you got an issue. So it's better to record that deed immediately, but there are some cases where it's not happening immediately. So we find out it's owned by an individual, and we know for sure that that's the case. Now what we need to do is locate that individual. And that's where I talk about this Google search. Well, if it's owned by John and Linda Smith, try this sometime if you're curious. Go on to Google and do a search on John Smith. And you'll find 46,500,000 web pages. That could be a huge waste of time. You can look in the phone book for this person, but generally speaking, if there's a listing, it'll be disconnected because they've moved out of the house where the number was located. Talk to the neighbors. You can ask the neighbors around the house, but you got to beware of the WTMI. That's worse than TMI, by the way. TMI is too much information. WTMI is way too much information. And sometimes a conversation with the neighbors will result in WTMI, where they're telling you about, their dog was pooping in my yard, and the husband was sleeping with so-and-so, and I don't want to know any of that. Although the neighbors can shed some light. Put a FSBO sign in their yard with your number on it. Now, this requires a lot of it requires a lot of chutzpah. Great Yiddish word, chutzpah. What is chutzpah? Guts, cojones, whatever, I've never done this myself. I have a lot of chutzpah, but I've never done this. There was a student that suggested it, and he said it works like a charm. If you're ever looking for the owner of a house, do this, and you'll get a call. You'd want to be prepared for that call, though. Your message might be something like, gee, that's great. I was trying to find you. Hey, I'll get that sign out of there right away. Forgive me. But by the way, while I got you, if I paid you all cash and closed quickly, What would be the least you could accept? You can send this owner a letter. If the process of tracking them down might include sending them mail. Well, how would we do that? We're going to send a letter to the house that is a known vacancy. Okay, that's the best case scenario, by the way. That's what we call the dead end. When the tax rolls indicate that the owner lives at the house that we know full well is vacant. That's good. When you come across that, get excited. Most people get discouraged. Get excited because now your competition has almost for sure been eliminated. That's the dead end. So we send a piece of mail to John and Linda Smith at the vacant house address. What good is that? Well, when you add a little language to that, it could be a postcard or a letter, just put address service requested on there. And what that does is it compels the Postal Service to tell you about any forwarding address that's on file. If you've ever done one of those change of address things where you go to the post office because you're moving and they give you the little kit and you fill it out, you put the old address, the new address, and then what they do is the mail that goes to the old address, they put a yellow sticker on top of it with the new address and they forward it on to you. It's called a forwarding order. And a forwarding order is supposed to last a year. Well, if John and Linda Smith have a forwarding order, and it's pretty common that they would, your mail piece will not only get forwarded to them, so the message should be a good one, and there's all kinds of examples out there in your home study courses and stuff, and in here in this manual. Your message should obviously convey the fact that you're interested in buying their house. So your letter will be forwarded to them, but then the Postal Service will send you a sort of a jumbo-sized postcard with a photocopy of your mail piece with the yellow sticker over it indicating the new address. And then down below it'll say old address, new address, and for that they'll charge you 75 cents. And what they'll do is you'll get one of those little postage due envelopes and it'll say address service 75 cents, and then when you pay that they'll give you the postcard with the new address. So that's a way to acquire their new address without them having to give it to you. Now you might say, well, if the Postal Service has it, couldn't I just go to the local post office where, in any town, Arizona, and ask them for the forwarding address for John and Linda Smith? They'll tell you no. They'll say, no, we can't give you that information. That's private, and we would protect your privacy like we're going to protect theirs. And what I've come to learn is that the post office pretty much thinks your privacy is worth whatever 75 cents and 44 cents is combined, because that's the stamp you're going to put on this thing. So your privacy is worth about, $1.23 or something, whatever that adds up to. It's pretty sad. But just for grins, ask the postal worker at the counter and you'll get a big speech. Oh no, we're here to protect the privacy of them. Yeah, really? Okay. Okay. Here's an interesting strategy. As long as we're on the topic of mailings, this is a great way to locate all the vacant houses within a mass mailing. And a mass mailing could be 50 pieces, and it could be 50,000. It's up to you. So here's what I mean. Let's say that you decide you're going to send a postcard or a letter to every address within this zip code, or within this subdivision, or within this hamlet, whatever. Your message would be something to the effect of I buy houses, of course. You want that message to matter because people are going to get it. But in the process, you add a little language to this mail piece. It could be a postcard, it could be a letter, where you say return service requested. Now previously was address service requested. That's where we're asking for the forwarding address. Now we're talking about return service requested. And so what that compels the Postal Service to do, and you got to use first-class postage to make this work. There's no extra cost. You put that on there. If your mail piece arrives at a vacant house, the postal worker will either stamp it or mark it vacant and send it back to you. You send out 100 this week, 100 next week, 100 the week after. You send out 1,000 this week. Every vacant house within the scope of that mailing will get sent back to you marked vacant. So you just found all the vacant houses in that area without anybody having to drive any streets or neighborhoods. Is that pretty slick? You want me to explain that again? Did you get it? By the way, that one little strategy right there was worth coming here. It does require that you have the intestinal fortitude to actually do a mailing. Some of you are familiar with the yellow letter. How many of you are familiar with the yellow letter? You go and you put address service or return service requested on a yellow letter, and you've just contaminated it. Yeah, the yellow letter is this cool concept where it's printed on yellow lined paper to look like it's handwritten on a pad, on a yellow pad. And it says, hey, my wife Helen and I are interested in buying your house at 123 Elm Street. If you're interested in selling, please call us or whatever. Well, to make it effective, what they call open rate, we want this thing to get opened. They suggest that you do a handwritten font on the address and use a live 44-cent stamp that somebody stuck on there, not a pre-printed indicia or anything like that. Well, the idea is the letter should look like it's coming from Grandma, and that way your open rate will go to like 100%. Well, as soon as you put that on there, it doesn't look like it came from Grandma at all. Because this is what direct mail marketers use. These tools are what direct mail marketers use to keep their database clean. So we're just piggybacking on that. And I'll tell you, as far as open rate goes, I kind of like postcards because there's nothing to open. The open rate on postcards is 100%. The discard rate is probably about 98. But that's okay because they're going to at least look at our message, I'll buy your house, as they fling it into the trash. Where do most people open their mail, by the way? Over the trash. How many of you have ever thrown something out that you didn't even open in the last 24 hours? This is a way to cull out the vacant houses within the scope of any mailing you're doing. Why not use it?